So this is the continuation of the chapter on Mendelian genetics. I have already introduced that not all of the patterns or inheritance patterns are following that of what Mendel has introduced to us. And there are inheritance patterns that are more complex than what was predicted by Mendelian genetics. There are some heritable or many heritable characters that are not determined by only one gene with two alleles. Kasi ito lagi yung tinatandaan ko when we discuss Mendelian genetics. One allele or one gene, two alleles. Ganun lang siya. Yung variation lang ng alleles or yung traits na makikita mo that is observable. And in Mendelian genetics, usually observable yung pattern or yung traits. Makikita natin. Dalawa lang lagi yung variety or yung alleles will always be dalawa. So, but we also know that there are some traits, multiple. Yung isa pula, yung isa puti, tapos biglang may lalabas sa pink, halimbawa sa color, mga ganyan. Tapos may mga genes or may mga traits, may mga alleles naman na or phenotypes na minsan kailangan ng multiple genes para lumabas. So it defies what Mendel predicted or what Mendel presented to us. However, the basic principle of segregation and independent assortment, the laws of inheritance, apply to this, even if the patterns are complex. So we extend the Mendelian genetics for a single gene. So inheritance of characters by a single gene may deviate from simple Mendelian patterns if the alleles are not completely dominant or recessive. So may mga makikita tayo na in-between na result ng alleles. Kaya hindi natin masasabi kung siya ba talaga ay dominant or recessive. When a gene has more than two alleles, ayan, kasi sabi ko nga kanina, like when I was studying Mendelian genetics, lagi yung allele ni Mendel, dalawa lang. And that's how he observed or described it in Garden Peace. Yung character lagi lang may dalawang variation, hindi lalampas kasi nahirapan siyang i-explain na yon. And wala na siyang idea or thought about how to explain bakit kung red and white lang yung pinag-uusapan with regards to color, halimbawa ng ibang halaman, why is there a pink color? Why is there an in-between? So, hindi in-explain ni Mendel yon. When a gene produces multiple phenotypes, pag may mga iba't, yun nga, merong mga genes kasi kahit ang sabi natin, ang rule ni Mendel, one gene or one one gene, one phenotype. Pero merong mga genes na bukod halimbawa sa color, pati yung structure kasama sa kanya, yung itsura hindi lang isa lang yung phenotype na lumalabas. So that cannot be simply explained by Mendelian genetics or what Mendel presented. That's why we have the following concepts. Yung sa degrees of dominance. Yung complete dominance, these are the phenotypes. When the phenotypes are heterozygous, or yung dominant heterozygote are identical. Ayan. Occurs when phenotypes of the heterozygote and dominant homozygote are identical. Bale, ito yung diniscuss natin with Mendel, yung Mendelian genetics sa complete dominance. Pag may dominant allele, ito yung lalabas na trait or na phenotype. Ito yung ma-observe natin kapag the dominant allele is present, even if it's heterozygous or homozygous. So, ganun yung complete dominance. Yun yung pinresent last week. But there are some topics on dominance. Say yung incomplete dominance. When the phenotype of F1 or the first filial generation hybrid is somewhere between may pumasok. Wait lang. Ayan, si Ella. When the phenotype is somewhere between the phenotypes of the two parental varieties. Ito yung sinasabi ko kanina na wala sa, yung example niya is, yung phenotypes na ine-expect mo is white and red, pero bakit may pink? Ayan. So that's incomplete dominance, or may parang minsan ginagamit ko yung term na mixing of colors kung color yung pinag-uusapan, or mixing of traits. And then there is also co-dominance, wherein the two dominant alleles affect the phenotype in separate distinguishable ways. So makikita mo sa co-dominance, hindi lang parehong nag-a-appear yung traits or yung phenotype. So these are the different degrees of dominance. Imaginein first kung ano yung difference between incomplete and co-dominance, no? Kasi dito ako laging nalilito. Ano ba yung incomplete dominance? Ano ba yung co-dominance? Yun lang. Siguro from the terminologies, pag sinabing co-dominance, kasi nga pareho, both would be present. So they are distinguishable. Both of the phenotypes are distinguishable. Nag-a-appear siya pareho. Hindi siya nagmi-mix, hindi siya whatever, but they are both present. So kung halimbawa sa kulay, red and white, both of them will appear. No mixing of colors. So may patches ng red, may patches ng white kang makikita. Pero pag sinabing incomplete dominance, incomplete, so mapapansin mo na merong mixing of the trait of the phenotype. So kung red and white, merong in between na lalabas, merong pink na lalabas na kulay. Ayan. So that is for the degree of dominance. Now, ito yung makikita po ulit natin sa slide. We have the parental generation. Remember, again, paulit-ulit natin sasabihin na pag sa parental generation, we can only use pure line or true breed. Yun lang yung pwede nating mate or i-cross. So in this example, you will see, okay, may mga nagtanong, paano po yung letter na gagamitin natin when we, pag nagko-cross tayo, halimbawa, ano yung mga symbols na gagamitin? Mapapansin nyo, C yung ginamit for the gamete or for the genotype. C kasi we're talking about the color. Kasi yung red and yung white na alleles, they are in a way parang dominant sila pareho. Kaya capital letters yung mapapansin nyo. So, by the way, sinabi ko na ba na this is an example of incomplete dominance? Ayan naman, obvious kasi katulad ng sinabi ko kanina sa example natin. Red and white, pero dun sa first filial generation, ang result ay pink. So, mapapansin nyo rin, both of the alleles are, in this case, dominant. Kaya capital letter pareho yung R tsaka yung W. So once you cross the two, you will have the first filial generation which is color pink. Hindi nag-manifest si red, hindi rin nag-manifest si white, and that's why we call it incomplete. So and you have now the gametes of the first filial generation, which is as you can see, CR and CW. Now, may iba't ibang way. There are different ways on how to write or to write the genotype. But we are going to follow what your book suggested. na may superscript, naka-superscript yung talagang gamit or yung ng yung genotype ng mga kinocross natin. Actually, pwede namang hindi kasi isa lang naman yung pinag-uusapan natin, 'di ba? So pwede namang R and W na lang, hindi na naka-superscript. Pwede 'yon. But for this case, para hindi tayo malito, ang gawin na natin is i-follow natin yung suggestion ng book. But again, sinasabi ko sa inyo ulit, there are some sources na hindi nila ginagamit sa superscript. Okay pa? Yan. Yung exponent na tinatawag. Hindi nila ginawang exponent yung yung mga gamits. So, now, from the first filial generation with this genotype, yung CRCW na pink, once you cross this using the Punnett square, yung Punnett square natin, you will have the same pa rin naman, the same anong tawag dito? The same result ng phenotypic ratio at genotypic ratio. 1:2:1. Yun lang, unlike sa codominance, diba pag recessive yung gene, pag ang phenotype would be 3:1. Dito, lalabas si pink, which gives us the same ratio with the genotype. 1:2:1. So, makikita natin yan na may isang red, may dalawang pink, and may isang white. For incomplete dominance, you have this F2 generation na merong 1:2:1 genotypic and phenotypic ratio. Yan. Simple lang yung kanyang sample. Now, let's have this this problem. Try nating isolve. Coat color in mice is incompletely dominant. Yellow and white-colored mice are homozygous, while cream-colored mice are heterozygous. If two cream-colored mice mate, what phenotypic ratio can we expect of their offspring? Show the Punnett square. Ito na yung sagot actually dyan. C yung ginamit ko for the coat color. Right? And just to explain bakit yun yung sagot, you will see here na yung coat color, ginamit ko lang yung letter C. Then, for the white gamit, W, of course, and Y is yellow. Now, ito yung gamit or yung genotype for the white coat, and the genotype naman, this one, as highlighted, is the genotype for the yellow coat. For the cream coat, kasi nga incomplete dominance ito, you will see here na both of the gametes are present. Right? Since yung question is, if two cream coat, dalawa nito will be, ang tawag dito? If they mate, what phenotypic ratio can we expect of their offspring? Parang yung binigay lang sa atin kanina. Now, with the Punnett square, ito yung lalabas. Napakadali lang. Which gives us 1 white, 2 cream, and 1 yellow. So, ito yung phenotypic ratio. And sabi ko nga, same lang din siya sa genotypic ratio. Kaya mas madali siyang intindihin. Alright. Now, topics on codominance and recessive, incomplete dominance. So, itong sakit na to, Tay-Sachs disease, it's a dysfunctional enzyme. A dysfunctional enzyme causes an accumulation of lipids in the brain. Hopefully, you will be able to discuss more on this when you have nag-ano na kayo, nervous system na kayo sa anatomy, no? Anyway,
Hindi po po. Hindi pa po.
dapat ngayon yata yun. Anyway, anyway. So, Tay-Sachs disease, bale, dito, medyo kakaiba yung ipapresent natin when it comes to how the phenotype will be shown at different levels of the organism. Yung organismal level, meaning yung buong tao, yung observable sa tao, in the biochemical level, and in the molecular level. 'Di ba? Parang, okay, so pwede palang lumabas yung mga phenotypes in different levels and in different, yun, sa iba't ibang level of organization ng tao or ng organism. Totoo yun. So, in the case of Tay-Sachs, yung at molecular level, yung alleles nila are codominant. So that's why Tay-Sachs disease cannot be, ay hindi siya observable for, maliit lang yung chance niya in 1,000 people. Mga 1:1,200 yata yung ano tawag dito, ratio niya na pwede siyang yung probability na mag-appear siya. So at the molecular level kasi, the alleles for this disease are codominant. So medyo in that stage, in the for the Tay-Sachs disease, yung mga molecules that are needed for Tay-Sachs disease to manifest, dapat codominant yung alleles. Or else, kung isa lang yung sa mga alleles yung present na magpapakita ng molecules that are needed for the production of whatever enzymes yung kailangan mag-appear yung both na alleles for Tay-Sachs. Now, pag hindi siya present, edi good. Pero pag present siya, now magpapakita siya in the biological level, biochemical level, tataas na siya sa biochemical level. Where in the phenotype or the enzyme activity level, papakita lang niya kung mabilis bang mag-produce yung enzymes ng enzymes, ng lipids, kung mabibilisan ba ng enzyme yung pagpo-produce ng lipids. So, incompletely dominant naman siya. So, kailangan yung alleles will be ang tawag dito? The alleles for this on this level naman should be incompletely dominant, or else kung halimbawa hindi present yung isa, hindi naman siya hindi magpapakita at the biochemical level yung enzyme activity, meaning hindi magpo-produce ng sobrang daming lipids sa utak yung enzyme. So that's in the biochemical level. Pag check yon, then in the organismal level, dun mo na makikita kung meron kang Tay-Sachs disease. But then again, may allele pa ulit doon that will say na if the organism, kahit na sabihin mo at the biochemical level, incomplete, pinakita yung incomplete dominance dun sa phenotype niya, or present siya dun sa alleles, pag in the organismal level, may recessive gene, or hindi present yung recessive gene sa both alleles, then hindi pa rin siya hindi siya observable. Alright? That's why may different levels si Tay-Sachs disease. So, sobrang liit ng chance for people to have this. But then again, kapag nag-check ka lahat dito sa mga yung allele combinations mo dito, nag-check ka sa molecular to organismal level, then you will have one. Ayan. I will not give an example of codominance kasi, well, sa book naman natin or even dun sa pinanood yung mga videos sa Amoeba Sisters, bale, codominance, halimbawa, ang example dun yung manok. May white tapos may black. Then makikita mo dun sa manok na both of white and black, tapos may spots siya ng black dun sa white. That's what you call codominance. Ganun lang siya kasimple. And ganun din sa pag gumawa ka ng Punnett square, ang application niya lang din is parang ganito sa incomplete dominance. Nga lang, iba yung phenotype. Iba yung observable phenotype. Kasi since codominant nga siya. Okay, so for the frequency of alleles, so the dominant alleles are not necessarily more common. Ito yung sinasabi natin na hindi ibig sabihin na porket dominant yung allele, yun na yung makikita mo sa population mo. Halimbawa, sinasabi nilang example, dito yung polydactyly. Pero yung pinaka ano na lang natin, sino dito sa inyo yung may mga tinatawag na widow's peak? Alam niyo yon? Alam ba natin yun? Yung widow's peak, yung ano?
Yung sa buhok.
Sa buhok, yung may ganito.
Pa-heart shape.
Oo, pa-heart shape. Yung hairline. Oo, yung sa hairline. Diba na ganun ako, di nakita na naman ang hairline ko. Na merong ano dito, pa-heart, na it will make na your face heart shape. Widow's peak daw is dominant. Pero sa Pilipinas, ilan lang ba may widow's peak? 'Di ba? Yung straight hairline pa din yung feature na makikita natin na ba't parang dominant 'yon. But then sabi, it's the dominant feature, yung widow's peak. Mas pag meron ka nun sa allele mo, mas dominant 'yon. So sabi ko, okay. So ibig sabihin pala talaga, dominant alleles, even if it's dominant, they are not necessarily more common in populations than recessive alleles. Okay? Yun nga, dito, an example, polydactyly. One baby out of 400 is born with extra fingers. But that gene is actually dominant. Okay? Pero lesser siya in the population kasi nga, most likely, mas maraming tao in the gene pool, mas maraming tao ang merong recessive allele. Ayun. So, if you will ask na, so brother, ibig sabihin, if one of my parents have polydactyly or extra finger, malaki yung possibility na yung mga anak will have one. Oo, kasi dominant yung allele. So, merong malaking percent, may pag heterozygous siya doon, tapos halimbawa, recessive halimbawa lang, si daddy yung may polydactyly, tapos si mom ay wala. So, recessive si mom. So, yung ilang percent yung chance nun na merong, ilang percent yung probability na yung mga anak would have polydactyly or yung isang anak will have a polydactyly. 50%. Okay? Now, for most genes exist in populations in more than 2 allelic forms. So, ito yung sinasabi natin na yung alleles ng, unlike sa complete dominance and sa incomplete dominance, meron naman na yung alleles there are a lot of alleles present. 3 or more. So, 2 or more than 2 allelic forms. So examples would be the 4 phenotypes of the ABO blood group in humans, which is determined by 3 alleles for the enzymes that attaches A or B carbohydrates to red blood cells. Ito yung 3 alleles niya. I na malaki, capital IA, capital IB, and small I. Ay yung ginamit kasi ang explanation nila dyan kasi daw sa enzyme na ano or dun sa protein na involved for the blood. Pero sabi ko baka iron. Pero I yung ginagamit talaga, letter I, for the ang tawag dito, for the allele representation of blood type. So an enzyme encoded by the AI allele adds to the A carbohydrates, whereas the enzyme encoded by the IB allele adds to the B carbohydrate. The enzyme encoded by the small I allele adds neither. So recessive si I. Now you will see here in this presentation na if your allele and the carbohydrate present, the carbohydrates would be present in the surface of your red blood cells. Kaya ito yung tawag dito sa ABO blood group, bali yung mga antigens na yan, kung ano yung magiging present na antigen for blood type A, blood type B, ganyan, blood type A, B, and O. Bale, if you will see the genotype of people with blood type A, that's the phenotype, blood type A, and the genotype can be both either homozygous for both the allele IA or heterozygous. For phenotype B naman, you have both homozygous B and heterozygous na B. For type AB, both of the alleles for type A and B are present. That's why you have type AB as blood type. So this also shows parang dito, 'di ba? Para siyang codominance for type AB kasi both of the carbohydrates are present. And then for type O, ito naman, may application na yung recessive gene. So since for people with type O, the genotype would be 2 small i's. Ibig sabihin, there are no proteins or carbohydrates. Again, there are no carbohydrates present in our blood type. So tayo yung may mga blood type O. Ayan. So let's have this problem na for an example of blood typing. Pretend that Brad Pitt is homozygous for the type B allele and Angelina is type O. What are all the possible blood types of their baby? Ayan. So sabi dun sa question, again, si Brad Pitt ay homozygous sa type B. So homozygous si Brad. Si Angelina, though hindi na sila together, but O si Angelina, diba? O si Angelina. So, eto si Ange, eto si Brad. Sa baba si Brad, sa side. Again, Brad Pitt, Angelina. So, if we're going to cross them, ang sagot ay ito lang. Pare-pareho yung probability na ang genotype ay IB, big I, B, and small I. So, ang phenotype is only this. Type B lang. Yan. So, most genes have multiple phenotypic effects. A property called Pleiotropy. Yun yung sinasabi ko na isang gene, multiple naman yung kanyang effect sa phenotype. So, for example, pleiotropic alleles are responsible for the multiple symptoms of hereditary diseases such as cystic fibrosis and sickle cell disease. So, medyo familiar ako sa sickle cell. Pag sa cystic fibrosis, ano siya? Ito yung sakit na maraming talaga symptoms na makikita. Itong mga examples ng pleiotropic alleles, kasi mamaya sa cystic fibrosis, i-discuss ko rin naman, pero marami siyang iba't ibang, yun nga, symptoms from yung degenerate yung muscles, ganyan. Kasi ang problem niya is hindi yung taong may cystic fibrosis, isa sa mga general na symptoms niya, nahihirapan silang mag-absorb ng nutrients. So, yun. Sickle cell disease naman, ang number one na phenotype effect niya, phenotypic effect ng sickle cell disease, yung red blood cells, alam niyo yung pang sa grass, yung pang like carrot. Carrot. Yung sickle shape, parang pag ganun na shape siya. Pa U or pa C shape yung red blood cell. So, aside from that shape, pati yung alam ko, affected din pati yung pagkuha ng iron ng blood. So, kaya hindi siya itsurang red. Hindi siya nagiging red na alam natin pag maraming oxygen kasi nga affected din yung iron presence in the blood. Those are some of the phenotypic differences of a sickle cell red disease. Actually, sickle cell na sa red blood cells yan and sa cystic fibrosis. So mamaya pupuntahan ulit natin siya. Now, extending the Mendelian genetics for 2 or more genes. Some traits can be determined by 2 or more genes. Kung kanina sa Pleiotropy, 1 gene, multiple phenotype. Ito naman, meron may mga traits naman na 2 or more genes, 1 phenotype or 1 trait. So, epistasis or epistasis. So, 1 gene affects the phenotype of another. So, there are actually 2 genes that are needed for 1 specific trait to be seen or to be observed. So in polygenic inheritance, multiple genes independently affect a single trait naman. Epistasis, isa yung requirement na kailangan. Pag wala yung isang gene, hindi mag-manifest yung mismong trait or yung phenotype. Remember, the difference between epistasis and polygenic inheritance. In epistasis, kapag hindi nagpakita or naging pag hindi nagpakita yung isang gene, pag naging recessive yung isang gene, therefore hindi magpapakita yung phenotype. Pag polygenic naman, multiple genes yung kailangan. Polygenic inheritance, ang example natin dyan, basta lumampas ng dihybrid cross, mga trihybrid cross na yun, above, yun yung polygenic inheritance. Tapos isang trait lang yung pinag-uusapan natin. So in epistasis, expression of a gene at one locus alters the phenotypic expression of a gene at a second locus. Okay. Example ng epistasis for Labrador. For dogs, yung Labrador Retriever, coat color depends on 2 genes. So, yung isang gene will determine the pigmentation. It's either brown or black. So, gagamitin nating alleles for the representation here is the letter B. So, B for black, capital B for black, and small b for brown. All right. Now, the other gene, the alleles that carries if it will show up yung pigmentation ng coat ng dog is the alleles E for color. E for color, yung capital E, and small e for no color. So that's the other gene naman. So E kasi ginamit natin yung E kung i-express ba or not to be expressed. Express meaning magpapakita ba siya or hindi. So determines whether the pigment will be deposited in the hair. In a certain breed of dog, the dominant B is required for black fur. Its recessive B, small b, produces brown fur. However, the dominant I is epistatic to the color locus and can inhibit pigment formation. The recessive allele small I, on the other hand, permits pigment deposition in the fur. What would be the phenotypes of the following sets of parents that would be the result of the mating? Okay, dun sa problem, binaliktad natin ha. B, except for the colors, capital B is for black, small b is for the brown fur. Now, instead of E, ginamit natin yung letter I. capital I for inhibit, meaning hindi magpapakita si color, of course. And small I, if it would be expressed in the fur, or it will be permitted for the pigment deposition in the fur. So what if you have this problem? Ito yung dalawang parents. Anong kulay nito? Nung unang parent with homozygous for BBII na brown, ay, siyempre sinabi ko na. Ano yung color ng fur ng parent na to? Brown. 'Di ba? Kasi sabi natin homozygous kay recessive yung genotype for for expression of the fur. Yung small b is brown. White kasi ayan yung dominant trait for the inhibited color. So whatever happens, basta merong capital I dyan, sorry ka na lang, cancel ka. Ganon. Ganon. Alright. So, what would be the phenotypes of the following set of parents and what would be the results of their mating? Eto. Tama. Brown yung isa, yung unang parent, and then white yung second parent. Now, eto yung mga phenotype yung hinihingi sa atin, no? Or what are the results of the cross? Based on the on the ang tawag dito, Punnett square, eto yung mga results na pwedeng magkaroon tayo. Yung dogs na tayo. So, genotypic ratio 4:4:4. 4:4:4:4. Okay. For the following genotypes. Capital B, small b, capital I, small I. Capital B, small b, tapos homozygous for small I. Yan. Ito yung mga genotypes. Now, yung first genotype, ano yung kulay nito?
White po, sir.
White. Very good. White yan. Bakit? Again, because of this inhibiting trait, allele. Are, anong kulay nito?
Black po.
Black.
Black
po.
Nga, homozygous nga. So, go daw, game, magpakita ka. Ito naman.
White po ulit,
White
sir.
pa din. Very good.
White
And this one is?
Brown po.
Brown.
So, tama po tayong lahat. Palakpakan yung bawat isa. Meron kang ratios, phenotypic ratio na 8:4:4. Tama? 8 na white, 4 na brown, 4 na black. Now, for polygenic inheritance, klaro na po yun sa sample natin sa dogs.
Yes po.
Yes.
Madali lang siya. 30 minutes. So for polygenic inheritance, quantitative characters are those that vary in the population along a continuum. So this quantitative characters and the quantitative variation usually indicates polygenic inheritance, an additive effect of 2 or more genes on a single phenotype. I think nasabi ko na naman kanina kung ano yung ibig sabihin ng polygenic inheritance. Example of polygenic inheritance are height, color, skin color, color of the eyes, ganyan. Usually yung mga pigmentation genes are actually polygenic in nature. So, eto yung pinakamasakit sa ulo na ginawa ko last year nung tinuturo ko tong polygenic inheritance. Bale, kung makikita natin, yung hindi po ito, anong laro to? Yung mga dots, ganyan. Yung dots na ito, yung nagpapakita kung ganong ang tawag doon? ganong ka-dark yung skin na mag-a-appear sa isang tao. Okay? Pag mas marami kang dots na black, ibig sabihin, mas darker yung skin mo or yung phenotype mo for a dark skin. Now, pag wala, edi yung case nito, white skin ka, ibig sabihin, or you have this case na albinism. Ganito actually yung yung proper way of sa discussion natin sa sa skin color ng humans. Hindi lang siya monohybrid cross. Pero syempre for the sake na magbigay tayo ng example for monohybrid cross last week, yun ang ginamit natin na case. But actually, skin color is not just influenced by one gene. Okay? Maraming gene yung kailangan. Now, in this case, we have this three types of gene, A, B, and C. For simple explanation lang na tatlo yung types ng alleles na pwede nating magamit for the skin color. And if you will cross these two, you will have this as your gametes, yung probable gametes, 2, 4, 6, 8, yung probable gametes niyan. Guys, ito yung ito yung sagot dun sa natin, sa tanong natin dun sa what are the probable gametes dun sa anong problem yun? Number 4 ba? Nung activity natin? Yes. Sa activity number 4. Wala na ako ng boses. So, ang tanong kasi doon is, so what are the possible, for number 4, dun sa below are the individuals of particular genotype, how many possible gametes can be formed by each? Ito yung sagot doon. We have 8 yung possible gametes that can be formed. Hindi naman kami nagtatanong ng Again, yung mga philosopher answer na, di ba pag gamete formation, di ba lagi namang 4 lang yung possible na pwedeng lumabas? Ang pinag-uusapan lang natin is what are the possible combinations, the number of combinations na pwedeng lumabas dun sa binigay naming example. So, ang sagot dun is 8. Pero sa allele combination, depende na yun sa number. Ano yung mga magkakapareho at hindi. So, pwedeng bumaba from 8 yung number of allele combinations mo. Yun na yung sagot sa 4.2 tsaka 4.3 sa worksheet number 1. So, another departure from Mendelian genetics arises when the phenotype of a character depends on environment as well as genotype. So, there are some characteristics kasi na parang sabihin natin na, halimbawa, yung skin color, hindi naman ibig sabihin na if you have the genotype for a brown skin, yun na talaga yung lalabas sa'yo. Kasi depende naman sa environment mo. Say, paano kung sobrang init ng environment? Definitely, anatomically, you will produce, kung halimbawa, lagi ka nasa ilalim ng init ng araw, you will produce more, melanin para magkaroon ka ng more protection in your skin. And in the formation process of melanin, definitely magkakaroon ka ng mas maitim na color na skin complexion. Kaya environmentally, yung factor ng environment cannot be removed from that. So there are a lot of influence that the nature can affect the influence of nature can really affect the genotypic the genotype of an organism. So yun lagi yung ating iintindihan. So the phenotypic range is broadest for polygenic characters, yes. And the traits that depend on multiple genes combined with environmental influence are called multifactorial genes. Yan. Kapag meron ng environmental but the environment will play a role for a specific trait to be produced. Say for example, in this ito baka naibenta nyo na to ng mga sa mga nanay nyo, yung mga plants ng mga parents ninyo. Lalo na medyo tumataas na ang price ng mga plants ngayon. Ang daming gusto mag-plant. Ewan ko ba. So for this example of plants, I know we have this in HSI. Para siyang litmus paper. Kasi if you will plant the hydrangea. Hindi ko alam kung paano i-pronounce tong name niya. But if you will plant this specific type of plant in a basic soil, it will turn out red. And if it is in an acidic soil with aluminum, magiging bluish yung color niya. So, ganun tawag dito. Even if iisa lang yung plant or iisa lang yung genetic niya or yung genotype niya, the color of the plant will be affected kung nasaan yung environment niya. So in this case, the pH level of the soil will determine kung ano yung magiging kulay niya. Maganda dito sa mga plants na to, it will actually give us an idea if the soil is basic or acidic. So, Mendelian view of heredity and variation. An organism's phenotype includes its physical and appearance, internal anatomy, physiology, and behavior. Ito lang yung yung number one na you have to remember when we discuss phenotypes. It's not only about morphology or physiology or anatomy or what you can observe. Can be caused by behavior. Whatever is our behavior, kaya nga sasabihin, minsan, di ba, sinasabi ng mga matatanda, ay kaugali ng nanay or ay kaugali ng tatay, ganyan. Kasi meron siyang tawag dito, genetically, it can be passed to us. Okay? Pero syempre, again, multifactorial. So, depende, halimbawa, kung may yung yung tinuro sa'yo, yung values na tinuro sa'yo. So, pwede pa rin magkaiba because of this explanations. But remember that phenotype can be in the internal, anything na minsan hindi natin na-observe. Like kanina nung sinabi ko, in the different levels of how Tay-Sachs disease can be observed. So, akalain mo, biochemical level pa lang meron ng alleles that will show yung phenotype, diba, of that trait, of that disease. So it cannot be just the physical appearance. You cannot just box the term phenotype with regards to physical appearance. So remember that, number one. So physiology, behavior, and all. Organism's phenotype reflects its overall genotype and unique environmental history. So, one package pa rin. Hindi lang naman talaga siya about the genes that we have. But environment plays a big role. If the genotype will be nurtured or not. Ganyan. If the gene, halimbawa sa mga diseases, okay, fine. Given halimbawa that you have cystic fibrosis or meron kang Tay-Sachs disease or even meron kang cancer, for example. Kasi cancer, there are types of cancer that can be tawag dito, passed on or heritable traits. May mga ganun type ng cancer. Meron din naman na hindi. Diabetes, halimbawa. Ayan na lang, diabetes. Nanay ko, bigla na lang nagka-diabetes, halimbawa. Pero sa namin, sa family history namin, walang may diabetes. It's not part of, high blood ang meron kami, but not diabetes. So, acquired kasi yon. Kumbaga, lifestyle yung nagbigay sa'yo ng sakit na yon. Hindi yung genes mo. So, again, environment plays a very big role. So, do not just go to genes or isisihin mo lang lahat dahil nasa genes mo siya. Pwede mo naman siyang makontrol. Kung may halimbawa sa genetic diseases, pwede naman siyang i-control or pwede siyang, yung mga ganyan type of diseases, pwede mo siyang as much as possible, hindi maging ano yan? Hindi siya magpakita agad or hindi mabilis yung effect ng mga genetic diseases sa atin. So, if you control your environment, if you control your lifestyle, if you know how to eat properly, rest, ganyan, if you know how to take care of yourself. So, remember that. So, many human traits follow Mendelian patterns of inheritance. Humans are not good number one, kaya hindi ginamit ni Mendel na human subject kasi, napakatagal nating mag-reproduce. We take 9 months, so kulang. And unethical siya. Breeding experiments are unacceptable. Imagine lalagay ka sa lab, diba? Hindi pwede yon. Yung simple na nga lang na mag-ano ka, diba? Magre-research ka halimbawa sa mga survey, kailangan pa may mga forms kang ipapapirma sa mga magsasagot ng forms bago mo gawin yung activity. So, and it's unethical. It's unethical talaga to do genetic research on humans. Not unethical, pero maraming concerns naman when we discuss it with humans or when we do genetic research on humans. So, but then, even if that's the case, basic Mendelian genetics endures as the foundation of human genetics pa din. And yung mga studies natin sa Human Genome Project, ayan, sa what we know about genetics now, human genetics, again, ang basis and foundation pa rin niya is Mendelian. So, meron pa rin, babalik pa rin tayo sa garden piece ni Mendel. But then, mas extended na yung alam natin about Mendelian genetics. Non-Mendelian genetics is part of that. Yan. So, recessively inherited disorders, there are a lot of disorders that are recessive, and they have a yung range niya is relatively from mild to life-threatening. Halimbawa, for recessive alleles, we have, it can be, recessively inherited disorders show up only in individuals homozygous for the alleles. Ganun din naman yun, parang nung diniscuss lang natin sa recessive alleles, how will it show up if both the recessive alleles are present. So, carriers are heterozygous individuals, say you are not, if you have the recessive allele, pero wala kang sakit, okay, so you are a carrier. So, heterozygous ka halimbawa for a specific disease. So, carrier ka doon. Most individuals with recessive disorders are born to carrier parents. Ayan. So, mapapansin natin yan, parents mo normal, pero merong isa sa mga anak na, yung parents ay normal, pero meron isa sa mga anak na merong sakit ng whatever disease is that. So, because both of them are carriers. So, yan, albinism is a recessive condition characterized by a lack of pigmentation in skin and hair. Recessive siya, like dun sa activity natin, recessive ang albinism. So, kaya hindi marami sa population naman merong albinism. Kasi nga, since good thing na recessive yung gene na ito, and mas marami yung dominant sa gene pool natin, mas marami sa population ang homozygous for non-albino. So ayan, cross lang for albinism. Siguro naman may intindihan na natin yan because we have the basic understanding of a monohybrid cross, a simple monohybrid cross. So we have a normal phenotype and a 50% chance that you are a carrier of the disorder, and 25% chance that you can have albino offspring. So if a recessive allele that causes a disease is rare, it is unlikely that two carriers will meet and mate. So consanguineous matings or between close relatives, hindi ginamit, but the term that we are using is, ano tawag dito? Kalimutan ko yung term. Pero ito yung close relatives na meeting. Bale, ano nga ba yung term na ito? Anyway, pabalik yan mamaya. The problem with this, kaya tabu siya sa atin. We do not agree with this type of meeting, or our society does not allow, but hindi siya tanggap kasi yun, pinalaki tayo na hindi siya magandang tignan, or hindi siya tanggap in a way. Hindi siya tanggap for our society. But I would like to go to genetics when we discuss matters such as this. Well, one thing is, maraming diseases or a lot of diseases can be observed from children from consanguineous meetings. Okay? Maraming observable na diseases ng mga anak ang observable dun sa product of consanguineous meetings. So, sa humans, ganun din. Mas nakikita natin siya. Kaya hindi advisable na magkaroon ka ng partner na malapit dun sa sa mga kamag-anak mo. Ganyan. Alright, most societies and cultures have laws or taboos against marriages between close relatives. Yan. Kaya, yun. If you will ask me kung ano yung stand ko dito, I will go to this explanation because hindi siya viable. Hindi siya maganda for the kids, for the children. And even, kung halimbawa sabihin mo maging normal naman yung mga anak mo, the big possibility na carrier siya ng mga sakit is there. So, yun yung explanation why we ang tawag dito, mas better na yung magiging partner mo is someone na hindi part of your family. Yan. Para rin, explanation din nun, sa evolution-wise naman, or sa preservation of the species is, para mas malaki yung gene pool ng mga tao. Yan. So, yun yung, pupunta naman tayo dun pag nag-evolution and genetics evolution na tayo. So, yun. Ayan, pinakita na ko na kanina yung cystic fibrosis, most common lethal genetic disorder. Andiyan pa ba kayo? Ayan, Michelle, thank you. Late ka na. Yes, late ka na. No? Oo, tama yun. Incest yung ibig yung tawag doon. So, cystic fibrosis is an example of diseases, yung isa sa mga lethal genetic disease sa US. Meron din naman cases tayo ng cystic fibrosis sa Pilipinas. Again, ano nangyayari dito? In cystic fibrosis, alleles results in defective or absent chloride transport channels in plasma membranes, leading to a buildup of chloride ions outside the cells. So symptoms includes mucus buildup in some internal organs and abnormal absorption of nutrients in the small intestines. So these are, ang tawag dito, cystic fibrosis, isang gene lang yung may problema, pero or isang gene lang yung magpapakita nung disease na to, pero sobrang daming phenotypic phenotypic, anong tawag dito? Yeah, marami yung phenotypes na makikita natin. Ang phenotype na, in this case, since sakit siya, yung phenotype na observable are the symptoms. Okay, of cystic fibrosis. Pero isang gene lang siya. Now, sickle cell disease naman, again, this is a genetic disorder with evolutionary implications. So, African Americans, marami, mga 1 out of 400. So, medyo maliit yung case nila. So, for sickle cell disease, it's caused by the substitution of a single amino acid in the hemoglobin protein in red blood cells. Medyo malaki yung explanation ng sickle cell disease. Parang sa formation pa lang ng protein, dun nagkakaroon ng problema that affects the shape of the red blood cell. So the symptoms or the phenotype for sickle cell disease, it includes physical weakness, pain, organ damage, paralysis. Yan, kasi hindi nagpa-function properly yung red blood cells. So, ito yung itsura ng sickle cell disease. You have the sickle cell allele that affects the hemoglobin. So, ayun, low oxygen intake kasi nga less yung amount of iodine that is present in in the red blood cell. Tapos, it affects the shape, number 1. Tapos, pag ganyan yung shape ng red blood cells mo, mas mahirap siyang mag-flow sa veins. So, technically, ang mangyayari is magka-clog yung mga ano natin, yung mga blood vessels natin because of the shape of the sickle cell red blood cells. Ayan. Dominantly inherited disorders. Some human disorders are caused by dominant alleles. Ito naman. Dominant alleles that cause a little disease are rare and arise by mutation. Most of the time, pag namamana natin ito or nakukuha ng mga may sakit, ito because of mutation. Or nagmi-mutate yung genes natin, kaya siya nagmi-mutate yung genes in a dominant allele, kaya nagiging dominant yung a specific sakit. So, achondroplasia or dwarfism, a form of dwarfism caused by a rare dominant allele. So, ibig sabihin, kahit dominant yung trait na to, it doesn't mean na makikita siya sa mas malaking population. So, dominant yung allele, pero maliit lang yung case na meron sa mga tao since kakaunti lang yung kakaunti lang yung observable na meron nito. So, you have here a sample of monohybrid cross for dwarfism, for this type of dwarfism. Okay, so akala natin yung dwarfism, isa lang. Meron pa siyang different types. Yung iba, caused by mutation in the gene for the height of the person. So that's it. So Huntington's disease, ayan, marami tayong mga degenerative disease na na caused by a dominant allele or dominant gene. So no obvious effect ang Huntington except if an individual, once you reach the age of 35 to 40, doon na siya magsa-start in disintegration of the nervous system or deterioration of the nervous system. Ayan. So multifactorial disorders, kung kanina, ayan, mga favorite diseases ng mga Pilipino, heart disease, cancer, alcoholism. Yeah, alcoholism is a psychological disease. Mental illnesses, both genetic and environmental components yung kanyang cause. Hindi lang siya basta-basta genetics. So, again, lifestyle. If you know that in your family you have this, lalo na yung, ito, number 1 mga sakit ng mga Pinoy, high blood, hypertension, ngayon, diabetes na, lalo na may mga mahilig sa asukal talaga ganyan. Kung alam mo sa family mo na meron kayong sa family history, di ba magdodoktor at may medical field naman kayo majority. So, i-review nyo yun, yung family history ninyo. And if you see and if you're aware na na may mga sakit sa family ninyo and possible na mamana nyo siya, modify your lifestyle. Ngayon pa lang, habang bata pa lang. Huwag nyo nang gawin yung mga, halimbawa, kung alam nyo may hypertension si mom tsaka si dad, tapos, sige ka pa ng kain ng mga food that can cause, di ba, yung level of fat, halimbawa, sa katawan, or that will cause hypertension. So, bago-bago rin tayo ng lifestyle. Exercise, ganyan, para maging healthy. Para kung dumating man siya, hindi naman siya darating agad. Baka nga sa atin, di ba, yung nakakatlungkot na ngayon nga, sa age natin, feeling young, may mga bata na, ang bata-bata pa, 15 years old, 14 years old, may hypertension na. Sabi ko, nakakalungkot lang kasi yun yung environment natin ngayon. So, please, take care of yourself. Genetic testing and counseling, this is important especially for those people, for those couples who would like to know the diseases that their kids will have. So, medyo pricey yung genetic counseling and genetic testing, but if you have the capacity to do this, lalo na before you marry or before you make a family. So, mas maganda siya para mapaghandaan nyo kung ano yung mga possibilities. Again, possibilities. Hindi to para takutin tayo. Mas magandang may alam tayo kaysa naman sa wala. 'Di ba? Magbibigla na lang tayo. So, genetic counseling is important because you will be informed of the family history. Fetal testing, ayan. I think ginagamit na natin to ngayon sa inyo. Baka may mga na-experience na ng mga parents nyo siguro, ng mga moms ninyo, na i-test kayo ng mga baby kayo. Kasi mas nauso siya nung panahon ninyo nung mga baby pa kayo.